Hi folks, John Cordisco back again. Another game from round 3 of the 7th annual London Chess Classic, the 2015 edition. The third leg of the Grand Chess Tour. First leg was Norway Chess. Second leg was here in the United States in St. Louis, the Singfield Cup. This is the third leg, the London Chess Classic. And we have a battle between two big-time heavyweights. As white, Vishy Anand, 6-time world champion, and as black, current world champion Magnus Carlsen. Interesting game. Carlsen, the last few months seems to be a little off his game. He's dropped about 50-60 rating points. I think a lot of the ratings were inflated anyway, but it's to put to you this way, a hard time for Carlsen is very good for everybody else. So let's get to it. Anand is white and Carlsen is black. And as you may have guessed, another Berlin. Let's not roll our eyes yet. They're all different. Pawn takes, knight f5, queen takes, king takes, knight c3. Damn Vladimir Kramnik, even though I like him a lot. If he hadn't brought it back to Berlin and refined it, he wouldn't be seeing it. In a couple of years, it'll go away. King moves over. Typical h3. We've all seen this a couple of hundred times. Rook d1. Bishop c5. I think it gets to a point where I think we should set up these Berlins in a tournament. We're at move 15. We'll just set them up and then go from there. g4. Knight e7. Bishop d5. And knight. Now, this is going to be an interesting game. I don't want to give it away yet, what the result is. But I will say this. Both sides have very good chances. Bishop moves. King comes up just to avoid that annoying pin on his pawn here. Rook d8. Finally gets the last minor piece. The Philip connects his rooks. Black still has to connect his rooks, but knight g6. Going after the bishop. Bishop moves back to g3. So that's pretty typical stuff for the Berlin. I think it's going to get to a point where I think the Berlins are pretty much going to burn themselves out. But we'll see how this one works out. But I will have to say that, in all fairness, we're seeing a lot of good, interesting middle games with almost all the minor pieces and all the rooks. It gets complicated. h5, f4, pawn takes, king to e7, connect his rooks, rook goes to h1. Trying to get rid of the rooks. Bishop. Now what he's trying to do, of course, is play bishop takes. And he's forced to play pawn takes. His knight can't take because the bishop is on the king. So he takes the bishop, pawn takes, knight c3. Bishop takes, pawn takes. One thing I will say about the Berlin, though, it gets some weird pawn structures. Of course, white's pawns are butchered right here. But it's not that big of a deal in the computer. Less than a half a point advantage for white. King to d7. I will say this about the Berlin, though, especially in the late middle game. The kings play a key role. They become, instead of cowering behind their own pieces, they become fighting pieces. f5. Typical. Knight drops back. Rook. Rook comes over. King f3. Okay, here we go. They're bringing it up. Now, I gotta tell you, in the last few moves, Fishy, I think, he hasn't blown it or anything, but this it looks bad for Black, but actually Black's got a very good position here, I think. And he's got a lot to go for. All his pawns are pretty much intact. Controls some center squares. White's queenside pawns are just butchered. But White does have the bishop. Rook takes, knight c6. Going after that pawn. Rook has to defend it. And you can tell you're not doing so hot when you've got to defend your center pawns with your major pieces. Carlsen decides to go g5. Now, do you take it in passant? Well, the top three moves on the computer, one is a3, one is a4, one is king f2. He decides to go a4. Kind of like a weird minority attack setup. a6, king over, king c8. It gets the king off of there. I'm really surprised at that move, frankly. Knight a5, king d8, and king c8 are three choices on the computer, and they're all 0.00, by the way. Tucks his king back. King comes over to f2, b6, and king f3. Looks like Vishy wants to get his king up. Probably to help those pawns, because his pawns are so butchered on the queen side, but the problem is the king can't cross over, because then it disconnects it from the rook. King to d7, it just comes back. Goes back to f2, and you're thinking to yourself, well, they want to draw it? The king's going back and forth. King goes back to c8. And this is, I think, where Vishy miscues. And this is one of the things that Carlsen does. When you have even positions, or darn near even, and Carlsen is grinding you, sometimes he'll put you to sleep mentally. It's really weird. And I think Vishy miscues here quite a bit, actually. He plays rook to e3. Not a blunder, but I don't get that move at all. It cuts off the king. Yeah, he's going to try to bring the king around, apparently. Maybe come up this way. But that's a lot of tempos. Knight to a5. Here comes the knight. Rook goes back to e1. At least he realized he made a mistake. Now knight's on c4, and that's a damn good spot for that knight. Nothing can make him move. Dark squared bishop. You have to sacrifice the exchange to get rid of him. And there isn't even a pawn to go after the pawn on d5, which is guarding the knight. So that's a damn good spot. King f3. Now the king comes up. Now the king goes back. Not sure Vishy knows what he wants to do. He's waiting for Carlsen. That's not a good part of the game when you're waiting for what your opponent's going to do. They should be reacting to you. a5. King f2. Give me an idea instead. I thought it would be a decent move. But try to rook to h1. At least get that rook mobilized. And after knight takes, rook to h7. King to d8. Yeah, granted, it's a little bit different to give up a pawn, but it definitely gets that rook active. After king to f2, c6. Looking to go b5 so that a pawn can get past. King to g2, he's just waiting. b5. Rook b1. I like that a lot. It kind of stymies Black's pawns on the queen side, at least temporarily. And this is where I think Carlsen makes a mistake. Knight takes c5 is the obvious move. He plays rook to h8 and basically blows a little bit of advantage he had. Now we're on move 40 right now, and that was the time control. You see that a lot where somebody will make a miscue on move 40. They didn't have a ton of time left, but I know they weren't in time trouble. If knight had taken instead, pawn takes, knight takes, king f3. It's still Black's advantage, but It's a little bit better, I think, for white than the other scenario. But after rook to h8, he just goes bishop to f2. Now the knight takes. Now the pawn takes. Knight takes. Pawn takes, check. King takes. White clawed his way back. But look at white's pawns. Just miserable. Bishop d4. That's a good spot for that bishop. What to do? What to do? Well, obviously, having the rook on the h file isn't working, so let's go to the other open file. He goes to e8. King comes up to attack the knight. The knight goes to e5. Give you an idea. Rook d4 instead. And after rook checks, king to c7, rook a6. That's interesting. After knight to e5, rook checks, king comes back, rook to f6. Now, of course, he's waiting. Take the knight on e5 with the bishop. He's moving the king over. Now bishop takes, rook takes, king to g4. Now your kings become fighting pieces. King to e7, hitting the rook. King takes, rook to e1, rook to a6, f6 check. King goes to g4. You don't want to go here. So what will happen is rook will check. And he loses defense to this pawn. King, rook, king, king f1, king, rook. You get the idea. Rook to f1, king to g4. And that's where they drew it. Now, it was funny, Yasser Seirawan made a comment when they showed the two agreed to a draw and they're talking over the board. And Yasser Seirawan kiddingly said, I can read their lips right now. Carlsen, or Anand asked Carlsen, how did you not win that? And Carlsen said back to Anand, how did you not win that? It's just one of those things. These guys are great players. And it's like any sport, chess included. Football, American football, baseball, basketball, you pick any sport. How do you maintain the consistency of how good you are? How do you do that? If people could figure that out or know why you're just not right that day. I think Carlsen was off today. I think Anand was off today. And I think a good result is the draw. But these guys are under so much pressure, mostly from themselves, to perform at their top level consistently over time. Ask any coach of a team and they'll tell you what makes them crazy is the inconsistencies of their team. One day they play, they can do no wrong, and the next game they can't even tie their own shoelaces. It makes coaches crazy. No different than chess players. They're at their wits' end trying to figure out why they're just not doing well that day. And I think this is one of those days for both players. They play each other a ton of times. They know a lot about each other. 2 World Championship matches. They pretty much analyze each other to death. And anyway, sorry to be a little long-winded there, but I was a little disappointed because I thought this was going to be a real slugfest. Bishop's got nothing to lose. He's a little bit behind in the standings. So is Magnus. So they really had nothing to lose, and I thought they would really go for it. And we got another Berlin. Oh, well. Anyway, folks, that's one of the games from round 3 of the London Chess Classic, the 3rd leg of the Grand Chess Tour. I hope you enjoyed it. I want you all to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.